Saphira, a hard-working black maid, was hired by Lenora to serve in their luxurious mansion. But when Magnus, the arrogant and wealthy husband, saw her, he refused to even taste her food, spouting cruel, racist remarks. Everything changed when Elara, his bold and compassionate daughter, stood up for Saphira, confronting her father and teaching him a lesson about respect and humanity. Like, share, and comment if you believe courage and kindness can break even the coldest hearts. Saphira's journey to the Thompson mansion had not been an easy one. Born and raised in a small, bustling town, she had learned early that life demanded resilience and hard work. Her mother had always reminded her that dignity and perseverance were worth more than gold, a lesson that shaped Saphira's every decision. When Lenora Thompson personally offered her a position in their sprawling city mansion, Saphira felt both pride and anxiety. She knew she was entering a world far removed from her own, one of marble floors, ornate chandeliers, and strict social hierarchies, but she was determined to prove her worth. The mansion itself was a marvel. Towering walls of polished stone, wide staircases that spiraled into glittering halls, and rooms that seemed to float in perfection. Every corner exuded wealth and meticulous care. Lenora, a woman of elegance and poise, personally guided Saphira through her duties. "Attention to detail," Lenora said softly, "is what separates excellence from mediocrity. You have talent, Saphira. Let it shine." Saphira nodded, absorbing every word, feeling a flicker of hope that perhaps she could belong here in some way. Her first days were a whirlwind of tasks. She cleaned silverware until it shone, prepared meals with meticulous care, and kept the household running seamlessly. Lenora was kind, often offering small compliments that Saphira cherished. Yet there was an underlying tension she could sense but could not name. The mansion's other inhabitants, servants and occasional guests, moved carefully around the household's invisible lines of hierarchy. Saphira, with her quiet dignity, tried to navigate these waters carefully, never overstepping, always mindful of her place. Then Magnus arrived. He was the kind of man whose presence filled a room, not with warmth, but with dominance. Every movement, every glance carried authority and entitlement. He had a reputation in the city for his wealth, power, and arrogance, and Saphira soon realized she was in the orbit of someone who judged quickly and harshly. Her first encounter with him was brief. A curt nod, a dismissive glance, and an air of superiority that left her unsettled. The true test came when she served him his first dinner. She had prepared a dish with care, using flavors that reminded her of home, blended with subtle refinements to suit the sophistication of the Thompson household. When Magnus lifted a fork, the air seemed to thicken. He paused, then recoiled, his expression twisting with disgust. "What is this?" he spat, his voice sharp. "Do you expect me to eat this? You... He stopped, the words lingering, heavy with unspoken prejudice. Saphira felt a sting she had never experienced before. It wasn't just the rejection of her food, it was the rejection of her very existence, a reminder of the color of her skin in a world that still measured worth by superficial standards. Saphira's pride wavered, but she refused to break. She continued her duties, silently navigating the mansion's cold corridors, her mind racing with thoughts of resilience. She remembered her mother's words, dignity above all. She reminded herself that her value was not determined by someone else's ignorance. Lenora noticed the change in atmosphere and approached her one evening. "Don't let him diminish you," she said gently. "Your work is impeccable. Your heart is what matters here." Saphira nodded, feeling a small flame of encouragement reignite within her. Meanwhile, Elara, Magnus's daughter, had been observing the household from a distance. She had grown up in luxury, accustomed to privilege, but she was not blind. She noticed the tension, the subtle slights, and the injustice Saphira endured. Unlike her father, she had a sense of fairness instilled by her own experiences outside the mansion. Volunteer work, school friends from diverse backgrounds, and lessons from Lenora, who often treated her like an equal. Elara's awareness grew each day as she watched her father belittle Saphira. It was one thing to see a servant criticized for mistakes, but another entirely to witness cruelty rooted in prejudice. Her anger simmered quietly, a combination of indignation, empathy, and a desire to act. She thought about Saphira's courage, the way she held her head high despite humiliation, and realized that standing up was not just necessary, it was urgent. Tensions reached a boiling point one afternoon during a formal dinner. The grand dining room, with its towering windows and glittering chandelier, was silent except for the clinking of cutlery. Magnus, in his usual commanding tone, dismissed the meal Saphira had prepared, launching into a series of insulting remarks that hung in the air like smoke. Saphira's hands trembled slightly, but she maintained her composure, refusing to respond. Then Elara spoke. Her voice, calm but unwavering, filled the room. She addressed her father directly, confronting his behavior with clarity and courage. She spoke of respect, empathy, and the fundamental decency that every human being deserved, regardless of wealth or skin color. The words resonated through the mansion, silencing even the most opulent corners. Magnus, confronted by his daughter's moral authority, found himself uncomfortably exposed. Saphira felt a rush of gratitude and relief. The mansion, once a place of tension and fear, seemed to shift in energy. Small gestures of acknowledgement began to replace disdain. Lenora's quiet smiles, Elara's attentive presence, even the subtle changes in the household staff's behavior. The lesson was clear. Wealth and privilege could not outweigh integrity and courage. As days passed, Saphira's confidence grew. She worked not just with skill, but with pride, knowing she had earned respect in a place that initially rejected her. Elara continued to support her, often standing by her side during challenging moments, a silent but powerful ally. Magnus slowly began to confront his own behavior, not fully transformed, but at least aware of the walls his prejudice had built. By the time the first season of the mansion's high society events arrived, Saphira was no longer just a maid. She was a valued member of the household, her talent recognized, her dignity intact. And while Magnus still struggled with arrogance, the presence of Elara, a young woman who dared to speak truth to power, ensured that respect and humanity were now central to the household's future. The mansion, with its grandeur and wealth, had finally learned a vital lesson. True richness is measured not in gold, but in courage, compassion, and the strength to stand for what is right. The days following Saphira's first humiliating encounter with Magnus were tense, each moment in the mansion layered with unspoken conflict. Saphira poured herself into her work with relentless focus. Every dish she prepared was infused with care, every corner she cleaned reflected her dedication. But even as she labored, the weight of Magnus's disdain hung over her like a storm cloud. It wasn't just his rejection of her food. It was the subtle, cutting remarks he left behind, comments that laced every interaction with venom. "Do you really expect me to eat this?" he had said once, smirking with the smug confidence of someone who believed the world belonged to him. Saphira learned quickly to navigate the household's invisible social hierarchy. The other staff, aware of Magnus's prejudices, offered polite smiles but little guidance. Some sympathized quietly, while others kept their distance, wary of drawing the patriarch's attention. In the quiet of the kitchen, Saphira sometimes allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where her skill and heart mattered more than the color of her skin. But reality always pulled her back. She reminded herself dignity could not be given. It had to be held. Lenora, the lady of the house, noticed Saphira's quiet resilience. She began to include her more in household discussions, seeking her opinion on menus, decor, and even events. "Your insight is invaluable, Saphira," she said gently one afternoon as they arranged flowers in the grand hall. Saphira nodded, a small smile breaking through the tension. Lenora's encouragement gave her a sense of belonging, yet she knew the true challenge lay elsewhere, in Magnus, and in the entrenched biases that dictated his world. Elara observed everything with growing concern. The young woman had always been conscious of fairness and morality, but witnessing her father's cruelty firsthand stirred a deeper, more urgent sense of justice. She noticed the subtle ways Saphira was treated differently, how Magnus's eyes would scrutinize her work with suspicion, how he sometimes ignored her presence entirely, and how he often spoke in a tone that carried the weight of both wealth and prejudice. One evening, during preparations for an elaborate charity gala the Thompsons were hosting, the rising tension reached a new level. Saphira had spent the entire day coordinating the kitchen staff, ensuring every dish met the exacting standards required for such an event. Lenora had entrusted her with overseeing the dessert table, a delicate arrangement of cakes, pastries, and confectionaries designed to impress the city's elite. Saphira worked with meticulous care, her hands moving with precision, her mind focused entirely on excellence. Magnus arrived unexpectedly to inspect the preparations. His presence was immediate and commanding, casting a shadow over the kitchen. He moved among the staff with an air of authority, his gaze sharp and unyielding. When he reached the dessert table, he picked up a piece of cake, examined it briefly, and then set it down with a curt, dismissive gesture. "Am I supposed to eat this, or is this someone's idea of a joke?" His words were cutting, filled with derision. Saphira's heart clenched, but she refused to respond. She kept her posture straight, her eyes lowered respectfully, letting her work speak for itself. Magnus's sneer lingered, yet he did not realize that every insult he hurled only strengthened her resolve. Elara, who had been watching quietly from the doorway, finally could not remain silent. "Father," she said, her voice calm but firm, carrying an authority that surprised even her. "You are treating Saphira unfairly. Her work is impeccable, and your behavior is not appropriate." Magnus's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "And what would you know of appropriate behavior, Elara?" he snapped. But Elara did not flinch. "I know that cruelty has no place here," she replied steadily. "Her worth is not determined by your prejudices. Every person deserves respect, regardless of who they are or the color of their skin. You cannot judge her by anything other than her actions, and her actions speak volumes." The kitchen fell silent. Even the sous chefs paused, sensing the tension crackling in the air. Saphira felt a wave of gratitude toward Elara, mixed with disbelief. For the first time, someone in that house had spoken openly, confronting Magnus with the truth he refused to see. Magnus's pride recoiled at the confrontation. He opened his mouth to respond, to reassert his dominance, but the words faltered. There was an unfamiliar vulnerability in his stance, a subtle recognition that he had overstepped in front of someone whose opinion he respected, his own daughter. He left the kitchen with a curt nod, his expression unreadable, leaving behind a charged silence. Over the following weeks, the tension in the mansion shifted subtly. Magnus did not openly apologize, but his behavior changed in small ways. He began to refrain from harsh remarks when Saphira was present, though the veneer of arrogance remained. Elara continued to support Saphira in quiet, meaningful ways, asking for her input on household decisions, defending her subtly when staff meetings occurred, and ensuring her work was recognized by Lenora. Saphira, in turn, felt a growing sense of empowerment. Each day, she moved through the mansion with more confidence, her skills honed, her dignity intact. She began experimenting with new recipes and techniques, blending flavors from her childhood with the refined tastes demanded by the Thompsons' social circle. The staff noticed the shift. They began to treat her with more respect, inspired by her resilience and the quiet authority of Elara's support. The climax of this rising tension came during the gala itself. The mansion was abuzz with high society guests, the air thick with perfume, chatter, and the clinking of glasses. Saphira had overseen every detail, from the perfectly arranged hors d'oeuvres to the intricate floral displays. As guests arrived, whispers of admiration followed her work. Even those unfamiliar with her personal story recognized the skill and dedication in every aspect of the event. Magnus, ever the critic, moved through the crowd with an air of superiority. Yet even he could not ignore the praise directed at Saphira. A few guests approached him privately, complimenting the dessert arrangements and remarking on the seamless execution of the evening. Magnus, faced with external validation for Saphira's work, felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. He realized that her talent and dedication had earned recognition beyond his control, and for the first time, he confronted the reality that his prejudice had blinded him to the value right in front of him. Elara, standing nearby, noticed the subtle shift in her father's demeanor. She approached Saphira, offering a warm smile and quiet words of encouragement. "You've done an incredible job tonight," she said, her voice sincere. "Never doubt your worth." Saphira felt a lump in her throat, gratitude and relief washing over her. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not just by those who depended on her labor, but by someone who recognized her humanity. The gala continued late into the evening, a glittering display of wealth and influence. Yet amidst the grandeur, a different kind of transformation had occurred, one rooted not in luxury but in respect, courage, and moral conviction. Saphira's perseverance, combined with Elara's boldness, had begun to reshape the household dynamic, challenging the entrenched hierarchies that had long dictated behavior. By the end of the night, Saphira stood quietly in the kitchen, reflecting on the events. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the moments of fear and doubt, and the resilience that had carried her forward. She realized that while Magnus's prejudice had been a formidable obstacle, it was not insurmountable. With allies like Lenora and Elara, and with her own unwavering dignity, she could navigate the challenges of the mansion and beyond with grace and strength. The rising action of the story had not only heightened tension and drama, but it had also established the emotional stakes, the moral confrontation, and the potential for transformation. Saphira's character grew stronger, Elara emerged as a courageous advocate, and Magnus faced the uncomfortable reflection of his own biases, setting the stage for the story's climax and resolution. The mansion had never been quieter, yet never more charged with tension. The dinner that evening had been long, the kind meant to impress visiting business partners, glittering with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. Every detail had been meticulously arranged by Saphira under Lenora's watchful guidance, but now everything was about to come to a head. Magnus sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, expression cold. He had been silently observing the gala for weeks, struggling against an unfamiliar force, a recognition of Saphira's talent, her dignity, and the quiet influence of his daughter. He could no longer dismiss her work, yet arrogance still fought against humility in his chest. His jaw tightened as he watched the guests whisper compliments to Lenora, almost always mentioning the flawless execution of the evening and, in some subtle tones, Saphira's touch behind the scenes. Elara, seated beside her father, felt the air thick with unspoken conflict. She had spent weeks watching, weighing her words carefully, knowing that confrontation could shatter more than just her father's pride. It could either liberate Saphira from the shadow of prejudice or ignite an irreparable storm. She took a deep breath, her mind tracing the arc of injustice, the humiliation Saphira had endured, the courage she herself had to summon. This moment could not be avoided any longer. "Father," Elara began, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge, "I think it's time we spoke honestly." Magnus's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. "Speak honestly? And what makes you think you can lecture me in my own house?" His voice was sharp, but she didn't flinch. The room seemed to hold its breath, staff and guests alike sensing the storm brewing. "I am speaking for what is right," Elara said firmly. "For what is fair. For the respect that Saphira deserves." She gestured toward Saphira, who stood near the kitchen doorway, quietly observing, but ready for the confrontation. Saphira's heart beat rapidly, a mix of fear, anticipation, and hope swelling inside her. Magnus rose from his chair, towering over the room, his voice now a mixture of anger and incredulity. "Respect? She's a servant. You're telling me I should, what? Praise her like she's an equal? You've lost your senses, Elara." His eyes, dark and stormy, fixed on Saphira with a piercing judgment that had haunted her since her first day. "I have not lost my senses," Elara replied, her tone unwavering. "What I have lost is patience for cruelty disguised as authority. Saphira is not here for you to belittle, to judge, or to demean. She is here to work, yes, but she is a human being first. Do you understand that? A human being who deserves dignity and respect, regardless of her position, her skin, or my father's wealth?" The room seemed to shiver at her words. Magnus's lips pressed into a thin line, anger and shock warring across his face. "You dare!" he began, but Elara cut him off. "Yes, I dare," she said, standing taller now, her eyes blazing with conviction. "I dare because I cannot stand by and watch injustice. I dare because I know right from wrong. I dare because this is not just about Saphira. It is about the kind of people we choose to be. Wealth does not give you the right to demean, and power does not excuse cruelty. Your attitude is unacceptable, and it has no place here anymore." Magnus's hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it behind clenched fists. The storm of privilege, pride, and prejudice he had long relied upon to maintain control was beginning to crumble under Elara's fearless resolve. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words faltered. He tried to assert dominance, to remind everyone of his authority. But the moral weight of Elara's words pressed down, heavier than any command he could issue. Saphira felt her chest tighten with a mixture of relief and awe. She had faced Magnus's disdain every day, endured his sneers, and now, through Elara, justice was finally being spoken aloud. She took a tentative step forward, and Elara gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. "You see, Father," Elara continued, her voice rising in controlled intensity, "this is not a question of social standing. It is a question of humanity. Saphira has proven herself through hard work, skill, and character. Your judgments are clouded by arrogance and prejudice, not reality. And if you cannot see that, then you have failed. Not her, but yourself." Magnus's face flushed with a mixture of fury and shame. The room held its breath as silence stretched, broken only by the soft clinking of crystal from the gala table. For the first time, he felt the full weight of his own cruelty reflected back at him, not as an abstract idea, but as an undeniable truth presented by someone he both respected and feared: his own daughter. The confrontation escalated as Magnus finally spoke, voice low, almost defeated. I did not realize..." His words faltered, the arrogance he relied on so heavily crumbling in real time. Elara leaned in, her expression a mix of compassion and determination. "You did realize, Father. You just refused to admit it, and that is what makes your actions so harmful." Saphira, emboldened by Elara's support, finally spoke, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion beneath it. "I have done nothing to deserve cruelty," she said, meeting Magnus's gaze. "I have only worked to serve this household with skill and care. All I ask is to be treated with the same dignity you expect from others." Magnus swallowed hard. The room seemed to close in around him, the voices of morality and justice echoing louder than any claim of wealth or authority. Guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but powerless to intervene. Staff watched silently, hope and fear intertwining. Elara continued, her words precise and unwavering. "This is your chance, Father. Your chance to change, to acknowledge the wrongs, and to do better. Respect is not weakness, it is strength. Compassion is not folly, it is wisdom. You have taught me many lessons, but I refuse to accept cruelty as one of them." Magnus's eyes softened for the first time. He looked at Saphira, then at Elara, and for a moment, the room held its collective breath. The confrontation had stripped away all pretense, leaving only raw human truth. He nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it carried weight far beyond its size. The tension broke like a sudden wave, leaving a strange calm in its wake. Saphira exhaled, her shoulders relaxing, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Elara reached out and gently touched her arm, a silent affirmation of solidarity and victory. Lenora, who had observed the entire exchange from nearby, offered a soft, approving smile. The aftermath of the confrontation was transformative. Magnus, while still adjusting to the reality of his own prejudice, began making small but meaningful changes in behavior. He refrained from cruel remarks, acknowledged Saphira's contributions publicly, and even began to consult her on household matters, albeit awkwardly at first. Elara, proud and resolute, continued to mentor and support Saphira, ensuring that her talents were recognized and her dignity preserved. For Saphira, the confrontation marked a turning point. She realized that courage and integrity could alter even the most entrenched biases, and that standing for herself with the right allies could reshape her world. The mansion, once a place of silent suffering under Magnus's arrogance, had become a space where respect, dignity, and humanity could thrive. By the end of the night, as the gala drew to a close and guests departed, Saphira reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had endured humiliation, prejudice, and doubt, but she had also found allies, courage, and a chance for justice. Elara's fearless advocacy had changed the trajectory, not just of her life, but of the household itself. And Magnus, though still learning, had glimpsed the possibility of transformation. The climax had done more than confront prejudice. It had exposed truth, demanded accountability, and allowed the characters to claim their moral victories. Saphira's dignity was intact. Elara had proven the power of standing up for what is right. And Magnus faced the reality of his actions for the first time in his life. As Saphira quietly retreated to the kitchen, she knew the battles were not over, but she also knew she had won something far greater than recognition of her work: respect, validation, and the promise of a future where courage could overcome even the deepest prejudices. The night after the confrontation, the mansion felt different. The chandeliers sparkled as usual. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air was no longer tense with unspoken prejudice. Instead, it carried a sense of cautious hope. Saphira moved through the halls with a quiet pride, each step a reminder that she had faced the harshest judgment and emerged with her dignity intact. Elara found her in the kitchen early the next morning, arranging ingredients for breakfast. "Good morning," Elara said softly, a smile warming her face. Saphira returned the smile, the weight of the previous evening still fresh in her mind. "Good morning, Miss Elara," she replied, her voice steady. "You did wonderfully last night," Elara said, placing a hand lightly on Saphira's shoulder. "Not just in the kitchen, but in showing strength. Courage like that, it changes things." Saphira felt a lump in her throat. "I just did what I had to," she said humbly. But Elara shook her head. "No, you did more than that. You inspired everyone here, even Father. Change doesn't happen without courage." The day unfolded with subtle but meaningful shifts. Magnus, who had spent the previous evening in a mix of reflection and discomfort, began making small gestures towards Saphira. He offered a curt nod. As she passed by his study, allowed her to organize the dining table without unsolicited criticism, and even asked her opinion on the menu for the day. Though his transformation was gradual, there was a visible change in his demeanor, an acknowledgement that her talent and presence mattered. Saphira's confidence grew alongside these changes. She began introducing subtle innovations to the household. Routines, experimenting with flavors and presentations in the kitchen that blended her heritage with Lenora's refined tastes. Guests who returned for breakfast or small gatherings noticed her touch: delicate pastries, vibrant salads, and dishes infused with thoughtful creativity. Compliments, once rare and filtered through Lenora, now came from visitors who recognized her skill. Elara continued to stand by Saphira's side. Together, they navigated moments of lingering tension with tact and courage. When Magnus occasionally slipped back into old patterns of judgment, Elara gently corrected him, reminding him of his own lesson. Saphira, inspired by the support, found her voice growing stronger, her quiet humility balanced by an unshakable sense of self-worth. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a prestigious culinary magazine praising the Thompson household for its exceptional cuisine. The editors had noticed the unique flair in the dishes served at the gala, the attention to detail, and the creativity that elevated ordinary meals into memorable experiences. The magazine requested an interview with the chef responsible. Lenora immediately recommended Saphira, her confidence in the maid unwavering. When Magnus learned of this, he hesitated, caught between old pride and newfound recognition. But he could not deny the truth. "If the magazine wants to meet the chef," he said reluctantly, "it will be Saphira. She earned it." His words, though brief, carried a monumental shift. He was acknowledging her talent publicly, a stark contrast to his previous dismissive behavior. The interview went beautifully. Saphira spoke with grace and humility, describing her inspirations, her process, and the joy she found in creating food that brought people together. The journalist was captivated, praising not only her skill, but the warmth and authenticity she brought to her craft. The article, once published, highlighted her unique perspective and the exceptional quality of her work. It became a talking point among the city's elite, and Saphira's reputation flourished. Meanwhile, the mansion continued to transform. Magnus, influenced by his daughter's unwavering moral compass and the undeniable talent of Saphira, began to engage more respectfully with the staff. He made conscious efforts to acknowledge contributions, offer constructive feedback instead of ridicule, and even express appreciation for the hard work that kept the household running smoothly. While he was not yet perfect, the walls of arrogance and prejudice that had dominated his behavior were crumbling. Saphira's daily life in the mansion became a balance of professional excellence and personal growth. She was no longer just a maid. She was a valued member of the household. Her expertise sought in both culinary and operational decisions. Guests and staff alike treated her with respect, inspired by her skill and the example set by Elara. The mansion, once a place of tension and silent humiliation, now hummed with cooperation, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to dignity. Lenora watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. She had recognized Saphira's potential from the beginning and had nurtured it with patience and encouragement. Seeing Saphira flourish, supported by Elara and even acknowledged by Magnus, filled her with pride. "You've done more than cook," Lenora said one evening, as they prepared for another small gathering. "You've changed hearts." The bond between Saphira and Elara deepened. They became more than allies. They became friends, confidants who shared triumphs, setbacks, and lessons learned. Elara admired Saphira's resilience and integrity, while Saphira valued Elara's courage and unwavering sense of justice. Together, they embodied a force that could challenge even the most entrenched social norms. As the weeks turned into months, the mansion became a place where respect and recognition were no longer rare, but expected. Staff were motivated, guests were impressed, and even Magnus began to understand that true leadership required humility and acknowledgement of others' contributions. Saphira's reputation as a skilled and innovative chef spread, bringing opportunities beyond the mansion that she had never imagined. One evening, after a particularly successful dinner party, Magnus approached Saphira quietly. His expression was a mix of humility and tentative respect. "Saphira," he said, "your work tonight, it was exceptional. I may have been wrong before." Saphira, taken aback, looked at him, her heart swelling. She nodded slowly, a gentle smile forming. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "I only ever wanted to do my best." Elara, observing from nearby, smiled proudly. She knew the journey had been long, filled with obstacles, but the results were undeniable. Through courage, respect, and integrity, change had occurred. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth overshadowed by prejudice, now represented something far greater. A place where talent was recognized, dignity was upheld, and justice was quietly but firmly asserted. Saphira's journey from a newcomer, judged unfairly, to a respected, celebrated member of the household reflected the transformative power of courage, advocacy, and unwavering self-respect. The story concluded with Saphira reflecting on her journey, grateful for the allies who had supported her and proud of the person she had become. Elara had proven that speaking truth to power could change even the most entrenched minds, and Magnus had taken his first steps toward humility and acknowledgement. The mansion, glittering under the evening lights, had become more than a home. It was a testament to the power of courage, respect, and humanity, showing that even in worlds dominated by wealth and privilege, integrity and moral strength could triumph.